So tonight I'm gonna make braised short ribs. There's a lot of recipes out there in order to do this, but I find this one probably easiest and most delicious actually. And it's, like I say, it's pretty simple. There's some recipes that even call for, diced carrots and onions and all those other things. I don't really think you need it, but I'm gonna show you. So first of all, you need to get these short ribs, and the best way to do that is select them out of the meat counter. They come in a variety of sizes, but try to get the most meat on each piece. And I usually like to get the ones that have bones on them because we're gonna cook them down over several hours. So once I've got my short ribs or selected my short ribs, I like to put a good coating of salt and pepper on those, a little crushed pepper, a little salt, get them good and coated on all sides. So that the next step is gonna be, we're gonna sear all sides of this meat, and I do it in a cast iron skillet, just like this one here. And I'll put some olive oil in the bottom of that cast iron skillet to get that good and hot, so we can put a nice little sear on them. So they each go in just like this. We get in the skillet, it's going to take about 2 to 3 minutes on each side. You're looking to get a good sear on them, and that's why you want to get it on fairly decent heat, and like I say, get a good sear on each side before we go to the next step. While the short ribs are cooking down and they've already been through a little bit of the process, the next step is I'll put a whole clove of garlic, or whole bud of garlic, and I'll cut it in half, just like so, and then put it in the cast iron skillet to get a little char on it, both sides. Gives it extra flavor, and the garlic really enhances the meat, the taste of the meat. As you can see, the short ribs have a nice sear on them, and they've been cooking here for maybe close to 10 minutes. The next step I want to do is start to reduce some wine and beef broth, but in order to enhance that flavor, I'll take some tomato paste, and I'll take about, for this amount of short ribs, I'd probably take a good 1 or 2 tablespoons. And I'll put that in the cast iron skillet, so that gets a little char on it as well. Just like those garlic pieces are getting a nice little char on them. This tomato paste as well, get a little caramelization going on that tomato paste. So the tomato paste has been cooking and charring for just a minute or two, and the next step is probably the most fun part of the process. With the short ribs, about 6 or 7 short ribs, or maybe even up to 10 short ribs, I will use almost an entire bottle of wine and reduce it in this as it's cooking under a fairly slow to medium heat. So I'll start to pour that in here. And let that start to cook down a little bit over the next few minutes. While the wine is cooking down and reducing, I also put about a cup of beef broth in again, for about this many short ribs, or that size of short ribs, I'll put about a cup, maybe 2 cups of beef broth. What I'm looking to achieve ultimately here is that when I put this in the oven, I want most of these short ribs to be fairly well covered in the wine beef broth mixture, and the objective is just to get it high enough that most of these are fairly well covered. The next step is you want to get these in the oven I usually put them in the oven anywhere from 250 to 300 depending upon how much time I have. If I don't have a lot of time and I want to get them done in about 3 hours, I'll put them closer to 300. If I have more time, I'll put them at closer to 250. The wine that I use is just a pretty straightforward red wine. You can get fairly cheap. You don't have to spend a bunch of money on that wine. So look at the bottom shelf. That's where you're going to get the cheap stuff. So now that it's reduced, the next step is to cover this up. So I want to cover these short ribs so they can cook in the oven for a good long time. So all that wine and beef broth and garlic just can work its magic. So shut the burner off. I'll just leave it in the cast iron skillet. Sometimes I'll put it in a cake pan. If I have more of them, I'll just transfer them into a cake pan. But if I'm only making 6 or 8, I'm just gonna leave them right in the cast iron skillet. They'll cook just as easy that way. But again, if you have more, it's pretty easy to transfer all this into a cake pan. So you want to get it as sealed as possible. I would put it on the middle of the shelf here. And again, get it covered, seal as much as you can here. You're gonna, again, cook it under low heat, 250, maybe 300, but 275 is probably even better. Today I have a little more time, so I'm gonna cook them at 250, and I'm probably gonna cook them for almost 4.5, maybe 5 hours, and I'll probably just turn them over once in that process. Ribs have been cooking here now for, probably 4+ hours. Not really sure how long, long enough. And I turned them over once, and you can see they've fallen off the bones at this point. And now I'll move on to the next step, which I want to take the short ribs out, set them aside a little bit, and I plan to reduce. I'm going to drain the sauce off all of this. So next step is going to drain the sauce, and then I'm going to cook it under low heat and try to reduce that sauce. But I'm going to take the short ribs off for a minute here. So in order to strain the garlic and some of the other elements there, I'll put a strainer over a saucepan. As you can see, the liquid has drained out significantly, and we'll just put this through a strainer. See, there's some leftover garlic in that. There's plenty of sauce. What I'll do then is take a little bit of that sauce and put it back in the pan, because I'm going to put the short ribs back in the oven for a little bit while I reduce this sauce a little bit. You can see the leftover sauce. I'm going to cook this down for another 10 or 15 minutes to kind of concentrate those flavors, and put the ribs back in the oven here while that goes on. So the leftover wine and beef broth that I strained from the short ribs has been now cooking in this pot for probably 15-20 minutes at least, maybe longer. And you can see it's really starting to thicken up really nice. And this is what we'll pour over the short ribs, maybe even over the mushrooms, and who knows, maybe even over the potatoes. So this is the final product, which includes your rosemary potatoes, your mushrooms, and of course, the star of the evening, the braised short ribs fall off the bone.